So we're going to take a look at the patch notes for 9.4 here. And there's a couple, well, it's mainly just a couple generic things to start off with before we get into the specific cards. So they changed how spying works on the tooltips. It's no longer given exactly to units that are moved or spawned or played on the opponent's side unless it says so, which is fine. And several cards have been updated to reflect that. And then they also added one of the best features of the patch is you can have the option to not save the changes to your deck. Now that one's quite nice, and I'm glad they are doing that. With those out of the way then, let's take a look at the specific card changes and what's going to be happening. First then, we have Count Caldwell will discuss the updated to the spying tooltip, that's fine. And then we have the Siegfried of Denzel. He gets +1 power, still interesting, beast decks might like this for Skellige. And we have Uma's Curse going from 11 to 10 provisions. It's a nice change. 11 was really expensive, and it kind of synergizes with some of the new cards coming out and how they want you to replay. We'll be able to replay your special cards. I've actually seen several people running Uma's Curse recently, so for anyone who's been doing that, you'll certainly be enjoying this change. The extra provision is quite nice. Also in the neutrals, we have Peller going from 5 provisions to 4. This is really interesting, and it's quite good. Purify has been getting significantly better with some changes. This helps you run Purify in any deck. 4 for 4 is much more tolerable than 5 provisions. And I think with this change, a couple other Purifies, I'm going to maybe start phasing out Defenders just because how prevalent I think Purify will be. I think it'll always get answered. Alright, then we have Mamuna, once again, getting a 1 provision nerf, so up to 12. She still does the same thing, she still plays for a ton of points, but she takes an extra provision and it hurts even more when you brick her now, or she has a suboptimal target, so probably deserved. We have our Queen of the Night. I like Queen of the Night. Now this is a straight overall buff. She gets +1 power at the in exchange for her bleeding being 1 less. This is usually better. Although I wouldn't say it's a straight buff because vampires with the bleeding is good, but there's no other vampire changes, so I still think vampires are going to be basically really bad. Yeah, really bad. But she might be better, and especially in monsters, the +1 power helps with Thrive. We have Naglfar's Taskmaster. Like I mentioned with Peller, several cards are getting, the Purify cards are getting changed. So Naglfar's Taskmaster is going to be a 4 for 4 now, instead of a 5 for 5. This specifically is really nice in Wild Hunt, because sometimes you look at the 4 provision cards, and you're like, I don't want the ones that are more conditional, like the Dominance 1 boost or 3 boosts instead of 1, 3 damage instead of 1, so you run this. Rotfiend, I think I mentioned this actually in my Death Wish videos that I think they should make it 5 damage, and that's what they did. I definitely had no influence on that. But this is a nice change, and it's now the only way that monsters can do 5 damage with a bronze card, other than the troll guy who throws the unit or whatever. So that's pretty interesting, and maybe you'll see this be used more, but I still think Death Wish is a little weak. And we have Artist. This is a big rework, and they're basically changing him into more of a power card for Skellige. Specifically, the Svolvod Fanatic, I think, is the one that has the, when he's damaged by 2, he transforms. So he gains 4 provisions, and the ability to play a 4 provision cultist from your deck when you play him. His ranged ability is unchanged, you're probably going to play him there still. But this makes him significantly more dangerous, for sure. And you can also play one of the cultists that potentially has some sort of engine value. Svolvod Cultist comes to mind. It could heal the things that are damaged. It also damages though, so that's kind of, that one's iffy, but you could try and make it work out in a cultist deck. But he certainly will be much scarier on deploy now, since if you play him as Svolvod Fanatic, for example, he'll play for 11, and then also have his ability from the range draw. Gramist gets a 1 provision buff. This is quite nice. Gramist is going to be a lot more popular in Skellige, I think, with the changes to, well, with the Fuchsia giving Doom to the unit it revives, and now we'll get to in a minute the change to not Freya's Blessing. Cinder Grip is right. So Gramist will probably be seeing more play there. Having him as a 6 for 6 is nice, and at 7 you always feel a bit expensive, but like you're paying for his refresh ability when usually you only really needed the 1 Purify. And it felt kind of bad when you only played him for 1 Purify and there's Well, now there's bronzes that do 4 for 4 with Purify, so this is probably deserved for him. Now we have Hammond going from 6 power to 7. You basically only ever see him in Skellige, not Syndicate, so we're putting him here. And he got a +1 power buff. It's pretty nice. Hammond used to be a card people played, and it kind of fell off. Even when they gave him the extra bleeding for Pirates adjacent, it still wasn't quite good enough. Now, Pirates have gotten some buffs recently, so we'll see if this is enough to get him into those decks, but I'm sure they're not the best still. This is the big one for the Melusine decks, guys, is the Cinder Grip is right. Now gives the summoned unit Doomed. You can't do 3-round Melusines now without purifying your Melusine. If you purify the Melusine, you lose the Veil. If you lose the Veil, it can get locked. It is what it is. There is one nice... So that's kind of annoying. So Gramist, again, like I said in Gramist part of this video, is I think Gramist would be a lot more popular in Skellige, especially decks running Cinder Grip is right and Fuchsia, planning on 3-round stuff. But there's one silver lining here, is that Nilfgaard can no longer invocation your 30-point Melusines and play them on you if they come back for Cinder Grip is right, because it'll have Doomed and it'll get banished when it leaves the battlefield. So there's that. I guess they wanted to make sure that the graveyard interactions didn't get too strong, which is fair, but make sure you have those purifies around if you try and do stuff over 3 rounds with these cards. Then we have Vildkarl going from 8 provisions to 7. This is fine. He probably deserved this. He was 9 earlier, and then when he first came out, people played him a bit, and then he got a little bit power crept. Then he went to 8, still wasn't quite used. Now he's a 7. You still have to invest the damage into him, but with something like King Knut, might be an option, but I still don't think people really be using that too much, but they might slip him into a Lippy deck now and then. We have Demon Light Longship going from 5 provisions to 4. That's nice. At 5 for 5, its highest potential value was after getting healed, and even then it has a cooldown 1 on each turn and didn't seem very strong. So this is probably good. I think the Demon Light Longship might fit into a few more decks now. The problem, well, here's the thing with the Light Longship. The on-crate Longship was just essentially always prioritized over this one. Now, it's still probably prioritized over it, but you'll have to pay 4 provisions for this one now instead of 5. And along with Hammond, maybe Ships Pirates gets a little buff here. It might be fun to use. We have the Mutant Cultist here, gaining 1 power. That's quite nice. And the thing is that I'll be using him now. The reason I had issues with him at 4 is because bombs can be really popular. And when Madoc bombs are popular, the bombs mostly do 4 damage. And that makes him basically unplayable against those because they get their bomb damage out and they set up their Madoc. This is better. I'm still not convinced he's a good card, but he takes 5 damage from instead of 4, so that's nice. I'll be trying him out. And then we have our Svalblood Butcher. He got a 1 power buff, so now he plays for 6 if you don't get any payoff from the allied damage instead of 5. If you do pay off the allied damage, so you block it on armor, then he gets +2 and he plays for 7 for 4. Or 8 for 4 rather, sorry about that. But that conditional damage has to be set up, which seems fair. He should be pretty strong if you can pay off the allied damage. Now we have the Trophy Catch. Is actually changing from a special card into a unit. This one's interesting. It's basically the same. It's the same card, but with an extra 2 points of value on a unit body. So essentially gets a +2 buff overall, which is interesting. And I believe it's turning into a ship. I should have put that on here. Sorry about that. But that's nice. So this is interesting. I'm curious to see how it goes. It probably won't be too strong, but the movement ability will be interesting. You don't need Hammond anymore. We have the Crow Clan Druid, so it loses a power and loses a provision. Overall, definitely a buff to Druids overall, because a lot of the Druids were previously 5 provisions, and it felt like they were expensive for what they did. This feels much more in line with what you'd expect. It's a conditional 7 for 4 if you have the Beast set up, so that seems nice, and feels like it kind of should have been something like this for a while, but hopefully now she'll get played. She wasn't played in any Druid decks that I've seen recently. Kukudek is getting his deploy changed with Zeal Order, much like Kiramet did, I think, earlier. I think it was her who got this treatment as well. Makes sense for Northern Realms, and it's just a small buff to the card overall. We have Iildico here, so she got a couple changes. This one's very Very interesting. So let's talk about it. She gets a 1 power buff. That puts her from 5 to 6. That's a big deal. 6 is where you can be pretty safe from bronze removal without setup, like a order with damage or something. And then you have order boost by 4, so they just balance her total points out the same, essentially. Then her zeal no longer requires inspired. The big deal is here, you can use her and set her up to give all your stuff zeal without having to inspire her. So perhaps you use her to give a whole bunch of stuff zeal and you run a consistency deck with pincer maneuver, relying on stuff like things like her and Vess and is it siege support or siege master, whichever one it is that gives zeal. Maybe you can run those and then play something like Blue Stripes Commandos or something with siege and run pincer maneuver to get your consistency and use stuff like this and maybe get your zeals that way. It could be interesting. Speaking of Kiramets here, she got a 1 power buff again. Not again, she got 1 power buff here, and previously went from deploy to zeal order. So she's pretty interesting, and this is nice for her. I've always wanted to make her work out pretty well, and she does have a ton of potential value, and this helps you get a bigger swing when she's played, so you can actually get that value, maybe pressuring your opponent or something. Sabrina is getting a change here. Basically she's getting to be a stronger play. She's going to damage everything by 3 instead of 2. It's a big deal for stuff like Whisper of Dobelthana, Kadwini Revenants that are 3 power. This is really good versus them, and if they're popular, you might see this a little bit more in Revenant decks. She's getting 2 provisions added to her for this, though. So it's more of a, you don't throw her in a Revenant deck as an option, it's more of, do I really want to include Sabrina? To be fair, though, no one really put her in Revenant decks before. Just saying it was, if you wanted to, you could have. Most people didn't, though. Will people use her? It depends how good Revenants are, and if Control is popular, which it always is until all the Controls cards get nerfed like they were, it was a long time ago now. They went through nerf most of the Control cards. Until something like that happens again, I think Engine stuff will be, and Revenants will be a little bit weaker. Sorceress here is getting a cooldown from 2 to 1. It's nice. She doesn't do too much, honestly, at 2 cooldown. Even at 1, you still need to set up the shields, so it's not like it'll be going too crazy. There's no shield all units on the battlefield thing that you can really take advantage of with a couple sorceresses, but it's a nice change. We have Temeri Drummer. It's losing its armor, gaining a power. I think, from what I know, I think this is a reverting of a previous nerf to the card, and I think they're doing this. They've done this with a couple other cards where they gave back their power on deploy in exchange for their armor. So they're worth more points, but the same amount to remove. Northern Realms' has historically been a very engine-heavy faction, although Monsters is sort of, when the Relic cards came out, took that over for a little bit, but they've been very engine-heavy, so it's nice to see some of their engines getting a bit of help. And this is one of the ones that used to be very popular. Squaretel, then we have Barnabas Beckender. So his boost goes from 2 on all the units to 3 on all his units, makes him play for 15 instead of 12. The thing is, even in Harmony decks, you just didn't run him because it was too hard to set up the payoff, and if you got 2, it was bad. 10 for 10 is not that great, especially if you're trying to set up something as a finisher. Now if you get 2, it's a 12 for 10, you have an upside of 3 potential more points. I'm still not sure you run him in Harmony, just because I think Harmony is really weak, and you need some really big cards to help you win in Harmony, like stuff like Yurden or Scorch. Not necessarily Scorch, but stuff like that, that's big, to help you actually win games, because you don't have enough power in the deck anymore, so I don't think he quite fits still. We have Ida. She's got the same treatment as Queen of the Night, basically, plus 1 power, and her overtime value is reduced by 1. And it's overall a buff, just like it was, I think, for Queen of the Night. This is nice, and certainly something I like seeing. Ida used to be a card I enjoyed playing, but she's been seeing a few changes. Zoltan Warrior, this helps Dwarves. Actually, another change for Dwarves coming up we'll talk about too. I guess we'll mention them both together, more or less. So Zoltan's 10 provision instead of 11. That's nice. The thing with Dwarves is they have several decent plays. And in Zoltan Warrior, you spawn the 2 rowdy dwarves almost all the time. You transform into Dwarf Berserkers. So, and you had the Dwarf Berserkers themselves. So Dwarf Berserkers were kind of important to how the deck worked. And this was one of the ways you'd get them, so you could get a bunch and like have those pinging away during one long round, and hopefully you'd get a long round with those Dwarf Berserkers and be able to win one like that instead of just relying on River. Speaking of the Dwarf Berserker, here it gets a +1 power buff. This is, I think, very, very warranted. It's a 8 for 5 now after 4 turns. And with the Mahakam Forge, the ability to 9 for 5 with the leader passive, so that makes a lot of sense. It also means you can't die to a single Reckless Flurry charge, which felt really bad previously, so that's nice as well. Now we have Reed Sappers, much like the Naglfar Taskmaster, 4 for 4 with Purify now. Very comparable to Peller. So Peller actually might be, well, Peller is probably better than both of these cards, unless you need the synergies or devotion, which is interesting. I didn't think it'd be that way. But I guess you get the value from the synergies from being an elf or a wild hunt and then the devotion effects, so it's not bad. Treason now for Nilfgaard gives the target spying. This is a pretty small change, but I really like it thematically. If there's a treason unit damaging the things next to it, it really should be on your side. So I think it really should have spying. It makes a lot of sense. It's one of my favorite changes, even though it's small. We've got the updated tooltip on spying for all of the Usurper cards, much like Count Caldwell. That just got updated. It's not a big deal. Cards shouldn't change too much overall. Now here comes a bigger one. We have Spotter and Viper Witcher Alchemist essentially swapped their abilities. So Spotter now is a 5 for 5 with look at the top 3 cards, and then you put one on top and then swap it with your opponents. So he now has that ability, and the Viper Witcher Alchemist has the Spotter ability of reveal a unit from the top of your opponent's deck and boost self by its power. And well, actually, let's take a look at it for a second here. So like I said, here we have Viper Witcher Alchemist is going to go from 5 to 2, so it's 1 power stronger than Spotter was, which is nice. And like I said, it's going to have Spotter's old ability. This is really, I really like this change because everyone who ran Gorthar Gaved would just randomly throw out Viper Witcher Alchemist as their choice most of the time, and try and RNG a win by stealing a good card from you. And this kind of stops that. So Gorthar Gaved will still create Viper Witcher Alchemist, but it'll now have this effect of the old Spotter instead of trying to snipe one of your cards. So I think that's good. If you want to run the effect of this, you should, in my opinion, be running the card. So Spotter, you shouldn't be able to just sometimes say, oh, I want the effect of, I want to try and RNG take my opponent's good card and win the game off of my Gorthar Gaved. So this is probably good. I think a lot of people will have a similar opinion to me about this one, and I don't think it'll be too contested. Now we have Blood Money here. So Blood Money is another provision added to it. Honestly, since the last season, I've seen 2 people play Blood Money in about 200 games. I think it's a little more games than that. I've only seen 2 people play it. But maybe this will help it out. Maybe I have a feeling they might want this to be something like the Witch Hunter faction, where you can use the Blood Money to pay off one of your bounties or something like that as a big play, as opposed to Line Pockets being the default for everything. Tamara Strenger also goes along the Witch Hunter stuff. She gets a +1 power buff. The Tribute 3 is still kind of annoying for her, honestly. But with the addition of extra Witch Hunters, maybe that's worth it still, but I still think people will use her. Her Tribute 3 is really annoying because you're paying a lot for her. And then the payoff, although it is decent, there's not quite enough Witch Hunters, I think, still for her to be good. Now we have the big one of the patch, the biggest one in my opinion, and it's Tunnel Drill getting a nerf. So it got its Profit 2 back, still is V2'd, damage enemy by 1, but now instead of getting +1 for just a Crown Splitter, if you played a crime this turn, it damages by 3 instead. What this means is you can't use Tunnel Drill's effect the same turn as... You can't use it for the 3 damage board wipe the same turn you play it. Because Vivaldi Bank is not a crime, so you can't Vivaldi Bank into it. That doesn't work, and I don't think there's another crime that plays this. So now it's at 5, you play it, they kill it, and that's it. So that's really nice. That might mean Freak Show goes back to being the default board wipe for Syndicate, which is certainly an option because you can just Freak Show away at 2 for 2 still, and that's still really good. People might get mad at that card next again, but this seems fair, and it has the 7 for 7 on deploy if you count the coins with this potential payoff, and it is really good if you get the crimes out. So maybe you want to run Defender and protect this now instead of just playing it instantly killing everything. We will see what ends up happening with this one. I think this one's pretty good. I'm sure lots and lots of people are going to be talking about this one and really happy. And will it make Line Pocket Syndicate no longer so strong? Probably. But I hope that it at least makes way for some of the newer bounty type stuff and Witch Hunters to do something.